I write about the media for the New Yorker, and if you write about newspapers, or you write about Google, or you write about Facebook and magazines and television, etc., where does the money come from to support the media that I write about? It's advertising. So if you follow the old Watergate adage, follow the money, you come to advertising. So I said, why not write a book and explore advertising? And are they going through the same disruption that happened to music and newspapers and magazines and television? And they are, I found. And so I set out to explore that over the last 3 years and write about the disruption to an industry that is the funding mechanism for most media. I mean, you think about it, 97% of Facebook's revenues come from advertising. Almost 90% of Google's does, not to mention percentage for newspapers and magazines and television. So it's a vital industry, and yet it's one under assault with grave consequences for the media.
So what are those consequences, both for the media holders facing Facebook and Google, and for the in between, for the agencies and the media planners, media buyers?
Well, the reason I came to the title Frenemies is that if you're an agency, you are suddenly faced by people who used to be your partners or customers who are suddenly your competitors. So your clients increasingly are taking stuff in-house to do that you would do for them as an agency. PR agencies increasingly become ad agencies competing with you. Consulting companies, which used to be Deloitte and others who were your consultants or your accountants, are now in the advertising business competing with you. Facebook and Google, who are your customers, are now disintermediating you and going directly to your clients. And the publishing platforms on which you placed your ads, the New York Times, Vice Media, BuzzFeed, NBC, increasingly are becoming ad agencies selling ads and disintermediating you as well. And on the other hand, the existential threat to this whole industry is the public, which is the frenemy. They don't want to be bothered by ads, particularly on their mobile devices. And if you look at what's happening, they go to Netflix or HBO, they're not bothered by ads. On their cell phones, they hate being interrupted, they put ad blockers on them. And if they have a PVR, 54% according to Nielsen, who record a program on the PVR, skip the ads. This is an existential threat to all of advertising.
What's to happen in terms of consumer preference and the survival of the industry?
Well, it's a fundamental question. I mean, for instance, take the privacy issue that surfaced with the summoning of Mark Zuckerberg to the Congress to testify and the concern about privacy expressed there. I mean, the argument that the advertising world makes is that in the future we'll have more data, and therefore we'll be able to personalize ads directed to you and make them more useful to you. And would that be a way of getting around the 30-second or the pre-rolls and the banner ads, which are so annoying to people? On the other hand, in order to have that data to target at people, you have to have information about people. And people start asking, how'd you get that information about me? What about my privacy? And that's the fundamental. You're in a seesaw here. So the more the seesaw goes up in terms of data that we can target at you, the more privacy goes down. And if privacy goes up, then your ability to use data goes down. And that's a conundrum that the advertising world faces and government faces, because in Europe they're answering it one way. They're putting much more restrictions on privacy. Will they do that here? And if they do, what consequences or impact will that have? One of the things you do when you're writing a book, if you hope to reach more than 3 people, is you try and figure out what's the narrative, what's the story I'm going to tell. Michael Kassan became a key narrative character for me in this book, because everywhere I went, I found out he represented. If you went to the publishing platforms, he represents the New York Times, he represents the New York Post, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, NBC, CBS, Facebook, Google, Microsoft. I mean, so he has all these clients. Then, in addition, he represents the big brand clients, et cetera. In addition, he represents often the ad agencies. So if you're having a negotiation at a table, Michael is at that table with all these different parties. I'm saying, what an incredible, if you're writing about politics, you're interested in following the power brokers. Michael Kassan in the ad world is a power broker, and I call him the connector. He's a great connector, he has a great personality, and people like him, but he's got enormous power. People worry, what is he whispering in the ear of clients or his clients that affects me. So he became a through line throughout the book. But so did Martin Sorrell, then head of WPP, who I spent also an enormous amount of time with. A great character. I mean, built the largest holding company, WPP, in the world. Very successful, and a character. And then you think about Carolyn Everson, another character in the book, and she's the head of sales and marketing for Facebook, and she became a vehicle to tell the Facebook story and their role. Les Moonves at CBS became probably the most successful modern television executive in modern history, became a vehicle to look at, can old media become new and find other source of revenue than just advertising and continue to reach new people, particularly younger people. So those are some of the characters in the book that I tried to weave a narrative around. If you're a reporter and you actually listen, you're always surprised. And so I was constantly surprised. I started 3 years ago. I did not have I knew a lot about media, but I didn't know a lot about advertising. So I was on a learning curve, and you have to listen and talk to a lot of people. And I interviewed about 450 people for this book. But I learned a lot. I learned about the privacy issue and how important, and I think a billowing issue for the industry, inevitably. I learned about disruption and who are the disruptors. And I learned about how people try to, particularly established legacy businesses, try to fend off that. I also learned and was surprised at the low pay scales in the advertising marketing world. And there's a study I quote in the book from LinkedIn, where they did 10,000 interviews, and of 8 industries, advertising ranked at the bottom in terms of pay scale and also morale. So they tend to not be recruiting people who go to Harvard and Yale or other universities. They don't say, I want to be, Don Draper when I get out. They want to go to Google, they want to go to Facebook, they want to go to Deloitte. But many don't want to go to an ad agency. That's a shocker and actually a real problem in the future for the ad world.
What are your expectations about Cannes and the atmosphere?
I would think that a key ingredient in the atmosphere would be anxiety. I think everyone is anxious. Everyone knows they're being disrupted. They know that there are problems ahead. How do you advertise on a cell phone? What's the government going to do about privacy regulations? Are the holding companies too big? Are the independent companies too small? Will the consumers reject our ads? These are all anxieties that everyone shares, be they a client, a platform, a publisher, or an agency. And so I think in that sense it brings them together, and yet they're all frenemies. And so they can't get too close.